That's the sunk cost fallacy.
The what?
The fallacy of sunk cost.
All right, everyone, welcome back. We're here to talk about something that I think we actually all fall into at some points, whether it's in the soccer card market or investing in general or just in our daily lives. And that is what is referred to as the sunk cost fallacy. And today I just want to talk about how the sunk cost fallacy relates to soccer cards and 5 steps that you can take to basically avoid the sunk cost fallacy. So I'll start here with a quote that I think is applicable to a number of different areas, but it's basically this idea that the money you don't lose buys just as much as the money you earn. And so said another way, it's, at the end of the day, your net profit is made up of obviously the money that you earn, but it is also made up of money that you didn't lose. And one of the best ways, or I would say easiest ways to lose money in any market, but especially the soccer card market, is through the sunk cost fallacy. And we'll get into that in a bit more detail here in a sec. So what is the sunk cost fallacy? So basically in poker and sports cards, investing, really any type of risk reward game, you cannot win every single hand or deal or investment, etc. And we often feel committed to something based on the time and the energy and the resources that we put into it. And basically we look at what we've dedicated to a specific endeavor in the past as part of our framework for investing, whether or not to continue down that path or to invest more or to, sell, etc. And so there's a principle in microeconomic theory called the bygones principle, which effectively says that you should only consider prospective or future costs when making a rational decision. So basically anything that happened in the past shouldn't have any impact on the future in terms of predicting the future or whether or not your future decisions are rational. So really at any moment in time, the best decision really depends on only current alternatives. There's also this idea called the planned continuation bias, which is a related phenomenon where people basically continue on the same course even in the face of changing conditions. So even if we are presented with information that says like, hey, you're going down the wrong path or this is a bad investment,
I'm going to go all in because I don't think you got the spades.
There's this bias that's like, no, I started on this path, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to see it through, even if that's not necessarily the best economic decision.
You're right. I don't have spades.
So there's some psychology behind this, obviously, and at a very high level, there's basically 5 psychological factors that underlie this sunk cost effect. So there's something called loss aversion, framing effects, over-optimistic probability bias, a sense of personal responsibility, and a desire not to appear wasteful. And the sunk cost fallacy and loss aversion are particularly linked, and I'll get into that in a second. I included this visual here, which is basically sums up the sunk cost fallacy, where it says, hey, if we don't get rid of this anchor, the ship will sink. And the other guy is saying, no, this was a very expensive anchor. And that kind of sums up the sunk cost fallacy in a nutshell. So loss aversion is basically when the price that we paid for something becomes the benchmark for value. So that sounds very familiar to the soccer card or the sports card market, where you often hear people say, oh, I'm in this for $20, therefore I want to get $20 out of it. So their value of whatever it is that they own is based on the cost that they spent to purchase that item, even if the market value is significantly less than that. There's also this idea of framing effects, which, depending on how something is framed to us, we place unequal biases on 2 preferences that are basically otherwise equal. So a good example of this is, would you rather lose $100 or save $200? Obviously, you'd rather, in a vacuum, save $200, but what if they were the same thing? So for example, if you bought a card for $300 and the market value is now $200 and you sold it today, you would obviously lose $100. But let's say that you wait and eventually that market value goes down to 0. Well, then you also lost $200. So by selling it today and taking a $100 loss, you are still only, you're saving $200 by not holding it further. Over-optimistic probability bias is basically after making a bet, people become much more confident in a positive economic outcome. So
60% of the time it works
every time.
In soccer cards, oh, I invested in X player, therefore I'm very high on that player's future. We become attached to the players that we invest in solely because we invested in them. There was actually a horse betting study done on this bias where the researchers looked at, or they asked people who had just placed bets and people who were on their way to place the bets, placing the same equal dollar value of bet. They asked how confident they were in the outcome of the bet that they were about to place, and there was a significantly higher level of optimism on the people who had just placed a bet, therefore just committed money, as opposed to the people who had not yet placed their bets, which basically highlighted this bias in real time. A sense of personal responsibility. So people are willing to invest more resources, time, money, etc. when they have a high sense of responsibility. So when you feel like you control the outcome or your profit and loss depends on your investment decisions, there's often people are often willing to invest more resources in those situations. And then finally, the desire not to appear wasteful. So I think we all don't like looking or feeling, dumb or stupid, and people are more willing to ride out initial investments so as to not appear wasteful, as if they're, burning money, or to basically not, appear of bad judgment. So people don't want to look like, oh, I bought the top of some card and then it went down 50% and now I sold it for a loss. People think, oh, if I didn't sell it, I didn't technically sell it for a loss, right? So those are 5 of the underlying factors of the sunk cost fallacy, and they all kind of work together in different ways to really highlight the sunk cost phenomenon. So the sunk cost fallacy in soccer cards. So just a bit of background here. So in mid-2020 was really the start of the sports card boom. We were all home due to COVID. There were some stimulus checks. People had extra money and really just had extra time and resources on their hands to sink into alternative investments. So a lot of interest in money eventually flowed into soccer. You can see these 2 graphs on the right. So the top one is the Card Ladder 50 index, where you can see the huge spike in, mid 2020 up into early 2021, and then a pretty big correction down to effectively like where we have settled today. Higher than where we were, but obviously, much lower than the peak, about half the peak. And over the past 12 to 18 months, the soccer card market, along with the macro economy, has experienced this correction. So like I said, this is the Card Ladder 50. This is made up of all sorts of different cards that are sort of beacons of the sports card market. And then the graph here below is the soccer card graph. So you can see soccer relative to the other market has a very similar pattern, but not quite as high of a high and a much higher correction than where it initially started. But still very similar nature in the sense that there was a big run up and then a correction. So many buyers, especially people who bought the top, are pretty far in the red. And a lot of the values won't likely return to the peaks for a long time, if at all. And I think what you'll see here is that owners will hold and continue to take losses while capital remains on the sidelines, because they bought the top and they want to try and get the cost that they put into these cards in order to sell them, when in reality, it's unlikely to happen. And you often hear people say, oh, I'm in this card for X dollars. That's what I want to get out of it, even if that has nothing to do with the market value of the card. So let's get into 5 ways where we can help combat this sunk cost fallacy. And I'll dive in each one in particular, but I think it's important to realize where we each may have certain biases and which of these 5 steps are more likely to help us, fend off any sunk cost fallacy or sunk cost tendencies that we might have. So the first one is, I think, just overall controlling your emotions. Loud noises! I think removing emotions and bias from any decisions helps us avoid loss aversion. And so one thing I like to always do is start with an investment thesis, which is essentially, for any card, I have a target. I have sort of a story in my head about what I can buy it for and what I think will make that card increase in the future. And this goes into the cost I pay for it, ultimately what I think the card might sell for, or at the very least, a sell target. For example, if the card increases by 25%, maybe I'll sell it. Maybe that's a good return. As well as anticipated price catalysts. This is really important because if you're buying cards without an understanding of what could make them increase or appreciate in value in the future, then you're basically buying them blind. I think it's important to at least have this investment thesis, even if it's not 100% right, as long as you're willing to update it as more information becomes available later. And the key here is really learning from mistakes and improving your ability to basically incorporate new information to impact your buying and selling decisions. I think understanding the market as well and being realistic about what a card is worth, again, without emotion. So if the market is down like it is today because of macroeconomic environment and a correction from a very high peak, it's important to understand when you bought the card in relation to that market trend and be realistic about what that card would be worth today given all the same information. Obviously, markets are volatile and can move up and down, so it's important to keep your emotions in check and not get too high and not get too low, because these are volatile markets. These are alternative assets. These are collectibles. These are things that, we literally see markets of players 2x after, big performances or big transfers. These are things to be expected, and I think going in and being more even-keeled can really help with that. And I think just remember, as I mentioned up top, eliminating the losses is often just as important, if not more so, than picking winners. I think it's important to experiment. It's important to try things out. And if you see that they're not working, it's important to know when to get out and not be too proud to take a loss on a card. So number 2 is thinking of the big picture. So hypothetical here, what would you prefer? Would you rather buy and sell 100 cards and make a $1 profit on each? So all winners, you literally make money on every card. Or would you rather buy and sell 99 cards for a $1 loss, meaning you lose money on every card, and then you sell one card for a $200 profit? So this is obviously not a trick question, and I graphed it out over here on the right, but in option A, you make $100. You profit $100. In option B, you profit $101. Now, obviously, this is a simplified example, but it's meant to highlight that you don't need to make money on every card you buy to be successful and to build capital. And in fact, it's often better to realize when you won't make money on a card so that you can sell the card, take the loss, and then reallocate that capital into a better return on investment opportunity. So here it's, again, developing a sound process and repeating smart decisions that have a positive expected value over time. Few large wins can often outweigh many small losses. I think if any of you watch my Grail Quest series, you'll see, or if you've been tracking, we've sold about 6 or 7 cards so far, and out of those 7, I think I've taken losses on 5 of them. But I'm still up a couple of $100, which on a percentage basis is I think like a 30 or 40% return on those investments, solely because I found a couple of cards that were big winners and I was able to at least minimize the losses on the other cards. And just be aware of how framing effects can influence your view on a situation. Again, we think about losing $10 versus saving $50. Or another way to put it is, hey, I could take a $10 loss today and reinvest that capital in a card that could provide a $50 gain in a month, versus holding the original card, and even if you break even, that's much less than the $10 loss plus the $50 gain. So something to just keep in mind when looking at any individual card, that this is all part of a bigger portfolio and a bigger picture, and it's not about whether you're winning and losing on every single card that you buy and sell. All right, number 3, so understanding all available information. And this is important because your information, any market, whether it's stocks or alternative assets, we deal in incomplete information. And that information is constantly changing, whether it's player performance, transfers, number of sets that Panini or Topps are making this year, checklists and print runs, number of rookie cards that some of the hype new rookies have. This information is always coming out and it's always changing. And the question you need to ask yourself is, do you have more or different information now than when you first made the purchase? So again, not falling into the plan continuation bias and just saying, this is my plan, I invested in Jude Bellingham and I'm not selling no matter what. Do you have more information now? And given that new information, would you still come to the same investment conclusion that you made 6 months ago or whenever you first bought these cards? So you're basically asking yourself, given my original investment thesis, does it still hold up given the new information I have now?
No fluff, just facts.
And things that you need to look at are pop reports. So how are pop reports changing for certain cards that you own? Sometimes you purchase a card with a low pop report and all of a sudden a bunch more get graded, and now your original investment thesis is different. And GemRate's a great tool for this, where it shows pop reports over time, as well as gems, PSA 10s, SGC 10s, etc. over time. Price histories, card ladder, PWCC, TerraPeak, understanding how a card is trending. So maybe a card was trending down 6 months ago when you bought it, and you bought what you thought was the bottom, but now, given some of the other information, it's continued to trend down. So you have to ask yourself, like, is there a bottom to this card? Are we reaching a bottom? What would make this card go up? And that's where, again, like, thinking about what your investment thesis was at the beginning versus what it is now. And I think another good rule of thumb here is if you wouldn't buy the card for its current price, given all the available information, so if you wouldn't buy like another copy of this card for its current price, it's probably a good time to think about selling that card, or at least having a good reason to hold that card versus selling. Because if you bought the card a long time ago and it was worth more than it is today, theoretically, if you still were as bullish on the card as you were when you bought it, you'd want to buy more, and you could dollar cost average in, things like that. So I think it's always a good gut check to ask yourself those questions. So, okay, so before we get into the fourth and fifth ways to combat the sunk cost fallacy, I want to get into some examples that highlight some of the things we've already talked about in a real world way to kind of hopefully tie some of these things together. So the first example is the Mohamed Salah 2013 UEFA Champions League sticker. This is his rookie sticker, or at least his more well-known and widely available rookie sticker from 2013. There were two of these. There's this foil one, and then there's a headshot one. So I'm focused on number 302, the foil sticker in a PSA 9. So, like I said, foil rookie sticker for a modern great player. He's an earlier part of the modern era. So this was printed in 2013, really before there were any like huge ultra modern print runs. Stickers obviously offer some condition rarity, just given they're very delicate, they're easy to bend, easy to scuff. Obviously not the same as vintage or pre-modern stickers, just because these were still, you can still find these often in unopened boxes, so it's not as hard to find them in decent shape. The pop report for this sticker is pretty high compared to pre-modern vintage stickers. As you can see below, there's 284 total graded, 39 10s, 132 9s, 80 PSA 8s. This is the PSA. Obviously some vintage cards don't even have 39 total grades, or pre-modern don't even have, 39 total grades. So it's definitely high compared to other, rookie stickers that we would look at for great players. However, it's also very low compared to other modern and ultra-modern rookies. It's kind of in this weird gray area where it's kind of overpopulated for a sticker, but underpopulated for a modern and ultra-modern. And, as a result, back when, and, spoiler, like I bought one of these, but back when I bought one of these, I was doing a lot of research, and I saw a lot of YouTube channels talking about this sticker specifically, and talking about the low pop reports compared to some of the other contemporaries of Mohamed Salah, especially in the high grades, PSA 9, PSA 10. And you can see there's only 39 10s, so even though there's 284 graded, it's not an easy card to get a 10 in. And so there's a hypothesis that, like, okay, if you get this in a PSA 9 or a 10, there's a lot of meat on the bone left there. It hasn't turned out to be the case so far, as we'll get into, but just some background there on this sticker, and sort of, to frame the sunk cost fallacy with regards to this sticker. So this graph I put together is basically from a year ago, or October 1st of 2021 through today. And you can see back in October 1st of 2021, the pop was around 131 total, and the price was around $200. And that price kind of ticked up through the beginning of 2022. And right where that green dot is, almost at the peak, is where I bought this sticker, I think for like $450 or $470, somewhere in there. And at the time, you can see this was right around the time the pop was 160 in total. So it had increased. But when I looked at this, my hypothesis was, well, it's a PSA 9. I think there were like 84 PSA 9s, and I want to say like 36 PSA 10s. So it's like, well, PSA 9 is only half the total pop. PSA 10 is even lower. This card's been around for 7-8 years. It's unlikely that there's just going to be like thousands and thousands of these graded. Okay, so what happened? Well, you can see what happened from the peak. It started to go down And then right around the middle of May, it was at right above $200 again. And the pop had also increased another 20% to 200 in total. And then the same thing, you can see the pop increases another 20% towards the end of July of this year. And now the price is trending down around, $150 for PSA 9. And then finally, as of today, the pop has increased by another 20% in total, down to 286. And this card is selling for, it has sold for below $100, but it's selling for kind of right around $100 right now. So very steep drop off. And as you can see, a very, clear trend line down. So what happened here? So this is the graph from GemRate, which basically shows from April of 2021, there were 15 total gems and 44 total graded, right? As we get to August, September of 2021, you can see that's where there's a big spike in number graded. So you go from, 60, 70 up to almost 140 and 27 gems. And then you can see there's a steady stream upwards, and then boom, a huge peak. So you can see this population has exploded pretty heavily over the last year and a half. It's gone up like 7x, right? Interestingly, the gem rate has a little more than doubled, 2.5x, and has stayed pretty consistent. So what this is telling me is, there's rapid growth in total pop. People are buying these stickers, people are grading these stickers, and that is depressing a lot of the non-gem grades because the pop report is expanding. Interestingly, though, there's very little growth in, gem rate. And so you could argue that from a condition rarity standpoint, at least at the very top, like the PSA 10, there is some condition rarity with this sticker. Now, the questions that we have to ask are how many more are going to be graded, and how many fakes. So one thing that's interesting to note that I've noticed after I purchased my copy is on the back of these stickers, there are serial numbers that were printed on there when, not serial numbers, but it's like a number code that were printed on there when they were made. And I noticed that some that come from different countries, I think Brazil specifically, don't have that on there. And what this does is it makes it much more susceptible to faking. And I think that also could be at play here too, where you have a sticker, it's a modern sticker, how many copies are out there, how easy is it to fake? I think there's just enough going on to really make people a little wary of investing in something like this. If we're looking at the sunk cost fallacy, and I'm going to pop back up to this slide quick. So yeah, I bought it up here. I had an investment thesis, but how has my investment thesis changed over time, right? So it's like, you can see the population has, it's probably going to be double by the end of this year in total. And obviously you can see that happening over time. Similarly, you can see the graded population going up and up over time. So I think it's fair to argue that, okay, even though I bought in pretty close to the top, I should have sold this a while ago. And part of the reason I haven't is just because I didn't really look at it as much of an investment as much as I just like Mohamed Salah a lot. So I don't mind holding it, but there's a lot of signs here that would suggest, okay, there's a reason to sell this. And if again, I'll pop back up here, if I would have sold it when the first 20% increase in pop happened, I could have recouped $200. So I would have lost, $250, but I would have saved another, whatever the difference is, $125, $150 there. So I think that just kind of illustrates how new information and tracking information over time. Obviously, if I saw this and I was buying today, I wouldn't have paid what I paid for it, right? And I think obviously the market is reflecting that as well. Would I make this same investment today, knowing what I know now? And I would say no, I wouldn't. So the fourth thing that we can do to quell the sunk cost fallacy is to identify and understand price catalysts. So really the question is the current price decrease or increase something that could rebound, or is it something permanent? Macro market conditions, obviously right now there's pretty negative macro conditions on all markets. So you could say, well, when that turns around, we would expect the market as a whole to rebound. Versus like an injury where a player gets injured and then they're out for 3 months and then they come back. Okay, well, we would expect them to resume their form and the prices would hopefully rebound. Whereas like a 10x increase in graded population, well, that's something that's not really going to make it, that's not going to make the prices rebound unless the demand increases by 10x. It's like supply and demand. You increase the supply, you need to increase the demand in order to keep the price the same. So it's important to understand like what's coming on the horizon. Is a rookie card that you just bought in, is it going to be the only rookie card, or are there multiple sets coming out? Are there a number of graded cards, still sitting at PSA waiting to be graded that could depress inflate the populations of the cards that you have and therefore depress the prices? So if it's temporary, it's potentially a good time to hold or even buy if you think that there's something in the future that's going to be a positive price catalyst. If it's permanent, or if the long-term outlook is unfavorable, it's probably a time to sell. And if the price is not expected to increase, you need to also understand like why you would hold versus sell. So in my Mohamed Salah example, one of the reasons I held versus selling was because I just wanted to have the sticker, and I probably could have sold and got back. Well, obviously I could have sold and got back in at a cheaper price, but it's easy to sort of lose track of that when you're not keeping your pulse on on all the information every day, and you're not critically thinking about your portfolio and what you're holding and why. And this is just a shameless plug. I did make a video on price catalysts that I think would be relevant to this conversation, so I won't go too deep into this now, but check out that video if you want to know more about price catalysts in the soccer card market. So let's get into another example before we get to the fifth way to combat the sunk cost fallacy. And this example deals with the Kylian Mbappe 2018 World Cup Prism base PSA 10. So this card is basically the face of the soccer card boom. Back in 2020, people were buying this card, grading it, and flipping it, and basically calling it his rookie card. And I think this was mostly because Prism is the most popular set in the mainstream soccer card hobby. People were looking at, Kylian Mbappe, it's his first, World Cup Prism card. It's his quote unquote rookie. And that took off. And that was a narrative that really made the prices of this card boom. It resulted in very high populations, especially for soccer cards, but even very high populations across other sports as well, or when compared to other sports as well. There's no condition rarity whatsoever. Almost all of these are graded PSA 9 or 10, as you can see in the table below. We have 7,300 PSA 9s or 10s compared to 7,800 total grades. And it was a lucrative early example of the raw to grade strategy in soccer cards, where you could buy these for, $5 or $10. You could grade them for $15. They'd get a PSA 10. You could sell them for hundreds. I mean, it was honestly that crazy for a while. And here's the card ladder PSA 10, the card ladder price history. So you can see back in October of 2020, this card had gone up to almost $1,000, over $900 in a PSA 10 base. It dipped down to $600 in early 2021, and then a huge spike up to over $1,200 in the first quarter, March, April 2021. And then you can see it came all the way down to $400 a little over a year ago, and then has slowly trickled down to almost $200 at the beginning of this year. You can see there's like a little bump, and then again trickled down, and now we're sitting right around $200. So these cards, a card that was once over $1,200 a year and a half ago, is now $200. And here's most of the reason why. So this is the gem rate report. April of 2021, there was 5,226 total graded by PSA. Almost half of those were PSA 10s. And you can see now today there's 7,886 graded and 3,626 are PSA 10s. So that's just massive, massive populations. I mean, even at compared to basketball and football, these are huge populations for a given card. So what are we seeing here? So we're seeing a 50% increase in 18 months. I would say there's some market cap concerns, because even at 3,626 and $200, that's still basically over 700,000 market cap at 2,500 back when they were 12,000. I mean, you can see like these are just massive populations. And one thing here that it's important to ask is, okay, the price went down from 1,200 to 200. Many would be like, look, it was at 1,200, now it's at 200. It could be a time to buy, right? Well, you have to ask yourself, what's going to make this card go up? Even if Mbappe is the best player of all time, there's so many of these cards already, and there's likely to be more graded in addition to the different color variations. So what really makes this price increase? It's hard to find a lot of reasons that this card would go up significantly outside of a massive influx in cash to the soccer card market and people deciding they need to have this card specifically, even though it's a base card. And I think given today's market, people would probably go after a silver or some other colored parallel before, going after base. Which leads me to number 5. And I think this is probably one of the most important things that we can always be doing with our cards is evaluating opportunity costs. And the reason for this is that the sunk cost fallacy causes you to lose money in 2 ways. You obviously lose money on the current investment you're holding by not selling. So you bought at the top, it's going down, you didn't sell, it keeps going down some more, so you lose more. But you also lose out on the returns that you could have earned on better investments had you sold. So you buy a card at $500 at the top, you lose $200, it goes down to $300. If you sold and took the $300 and put it into a better investment that could maybe double your money, you'd be left with $600. So you'd actually make $100 on the total on those 2 investments. If you don't sell and your initial investment goes down to $200, now you've lost $300. So there's an opportunity cost of keeping your money in an investment that doesn't have good prospects when you could reallocate that money somewhere else and earn a return on, even though you've lost part of the initial investment, you can still earn a return on that money versus just letting it ride. And so I think one thing you can ask yourself is, even if I take a loss in this card, what's the positive ROI investment that I could rotate that capital into? And is it worth taking the money out and putting it elsewhere? And so this is something I'm personally doing with a number of ultra modern basketball cards that, frankly, I bought in the hype part of the market, and unfortunately they probably just won't ever be worth what they were when I paid for them. So I'm selling those cards and I'm rotating a lot of that money into the soccer card market.
Soccer?
Soccer?
Soccer.
Soccer?
Football.
So in conclusion, let's think about what we can do with this information and how can we use these 5 steps going forward to avoid falling into the sunk cost trap and not losing more money than we have to on investments. So I think one important thing, like I mentioned, is having an investment thesis when purchasing your cards, knowing why you're buying something, knowing how much you're willing to pay for it, and being disciplined about, not pulling the trigger on something if it's out of that investment thesis price range. I think the exception here is when you're dealing with very short printed parallels where they might just not come up again. I think you probably have to be okay going a little above your cost target, just because by the time you see them again, the market value might already be, higher than what you paid or what you would have been willing to pay for it. I think it's also really important to have a detailed tracker to understand what price you pay, what your sell target is, and, profit margins, things like that. I think it's really important to know, like, at any given time, here's what I paid for this card, here's what the market says it is, and then thinking about what is a price that I would be willing to sell this card at. And then along with that, monitoring the market, understanding new information, which price catalysts are in play, which price catalysts are potentially on the horizon, and then reevaluating that initial investment thesis with all of this new information to say, should I still be holding this card, or is the current market price the highest that I think I could probably get in the near term? And it's also very important here to don't be afraid to sell for a loss. I can't stress this enough. If all the information that you are looking at and considering is pointing to the current market price being, at least in the near term, the highest value that this card will likely be, it's okay to sell and reinvest those funds into better opportunities or more desired collectible pieces. And again, learn, iterate, repeat. Keep making mistakes, keep limiting the amount you lose on those mistakes, and then take those learnings and rotate those into new investments where you have better information and can hopefully make a more positive ROI investment. And again, I'll stress this one more time. Not every card is going to make you money. The point and the goal is to make the best possible decision with currently available information. And then not just set it and forget it, unless you're investing in like vintage and you're saying, I'm not going to touch this for 10 years. But understanding, okay, what were the factors and the information available when I bought this card, and then monitoring that over time. And if it changes, don't be afraid to change your investment thesis. And if your investment thesis changes and says, hey, it's time to sell, don't be afraid to sell. So I will leave it there for today. I hope that you got some value out of this. I know it's something that I got a lot of value just thinking about putting together. So would love to hear any comments or questions that you have, and I will talk to you next time.